Last night, the Prime Minister spoke to Mr. Trump. I think he's going to talk to him again tonight. He obviously saw Mr. Zelenskyy. Do you expect the two presidents to meet again in the next few days?
Well, that is obviously a matter for the two presidents. But can I just say, first of all, about the leadership of President Zelenskyy, who over the past 3 years since Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine has shown quite extraordinary bravery, as have the Ukrainian people. But what you are seeing today in London is a meeting of European leaders where the Prime Minister who has spoken both to President Trump and indeed President Zelenskyy in recent days, welcomed President Zelenskyy to London last night and to Downing Street, will be discussing with European leaders, firstly, putting Ukraine in the strongest possible position now, because as we are having these various diplomatic talks, we shouldn't forget that the war continues on the ground in Ukraine. Air raid sounds continue to be heard over Kyiv. Secondly, then to discuss how we can have that permanent peace in Ukraine.
May I just stop you for a second? Can we address?
One moment, Trevor, just finish this point. But a permanent peace in Ukraine, and also the issue of security guarantees too.
Okay, can we address the progress of the war? It's being reported that the White House is considering stopping any aid to Ukraine right now. What would our government say if that took place?
Well, our government's position, and indeed it has been the position of the American administration, is peace through strength. It is about putting Ukraine in the strongest possible position at the negotiating table, and that is the case that we will continue to make.
But what would you say to the Americans if they did say the deal hasn't happened, we're stopping aid now?
Well, we will continue to be an honest broker and bring the different parties together, but we will also continue to make the case that peace is made from a position of strength, not a position of weakness. So it remains critical to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position. And we're not just saying that. Look at last night, for example, when, again, as part of the G7's accelerated revenue programme to Ukraine, the UK pledged over £2 billion. So that is the action.
Yes, I'd like to come to that. I'd like to come to that £2 billion of frozen assets, but just let's deal with the fallout from Thursday and Friday. Let me just first ask you, without going into the scenes that we saw in the Oval Office, this weekend, do you feel that you can trust the Americans?
Yes, I do believe we can trust the Americans. I believe the Americans are long-standing allies of the United Kingdom, and I think you saw that once again in modern times in the Oval Office in the Prime Minister's meeting with President Trump. And it is hugely important, and the Prime Minister is showing great leadership on this, that we keep Europe and the United States together. That is absolutely vital, not just in terms of immediately finding peace in Ukraine, but in terms of a permanent peace in Ukraine as well.
But yes, but if I can come back to what happened on Friday, pretty much everybody who has a television set saw it, and everybody can make their judgments about what took place. So let me, in a way, ask you again, watching those scenes, do you feel that this is an ally that you can trust, or did you see an encounter in which Zelenskyy was provoked, or was it his fault? Who was responsible for that row?
Well, let me just take the first point, which is that we do have an ally in the United States that we can trust. There's no ambiguity about that. Let me just take then what you're saying in terms of the scenes that we saw on Friday in the Oval Office. I've never seen anything quite like that. And obviously that is not how it should have happened. But what we need
So who
to
made that happen? Was it who provoked that?
Look, I'm not going to get into a commentary about that because I don't think that is of assistance at the moment. There is very significant diplomatic work now going on. It was the Prime Minister on Friday night who was able to telephone and speak to both President Zelensky and President Trump. He's spoken to President Trump again since. He's also welcomed President Zelensky to Downing Street. So it's absolutely vital that the Prime Minister continues with that diplomatic work, linking Europe to the United States, acting in the historic role we've had, certainly in the
All right.
post-war period, of being a bridge across the Atlantic, which is crucial for our national interest.
All right. Well, let's put the minuet of diplomacy to one side and talk about money and power. If the Americans withdraw, the kind of money that we're talking about putting in, you've mentioned a £2.25 billion worth of frozen assets and so on. The Americans' defense budget, is about $1 trillion, getting on for that sort of number. The extra $6 billion that our Prime Minister's pledged to put into our defense budget this year would keep the Americans going for 3 days. This is not much, is it? I mean, we cannot replace what the Americans do.
Look, nobody doubts the vital role that the Americans play and have played in the post-war security of Europe. And that is why the Prime Minister has been making the case about a security backstop being provided by America, and those discussions continue. But with regard
they don't do they? Mr. Trump was pretty clear you're not having one.
Well, the discussions continue on the nature of a security guarantee. But in terms of spending, let me come to that because I think that is your substantive point, Trevor. Yes, you are right to say that this is a once-in-a-generation moment, certainly unprecedented since the end of the Cold War, where Europe does have to now step up, not just the United Kingdom. And we made an announcement last week about the roadmap to spending 2.5% of GDP. We'll be spending over 13.4 billion pounds more in 2027 on defence than we are now. But it isn't just about the United Kingdom, and this is the case the Prime Minister will be making today. Europe collectively now has to step up because of the situation, not just that we see in Ukraine, but it is a question for the collective security of the whole of Europe. And I'm sure that will be discussed today.
Okay, but I mean, we can get into an argument about the numbers, whether it's 13 billion or 6 billion. But overall, the scale of what Europe seems to be able to offer literally doesn't get anywhere near touching what the Americans contribute. I think so far, even on the skeptical figures, it's well over 100 billion, or what Zelensky wants. So let's just go back to what you expect to get out of today. What will you be asking, what will the Prime Minister be asking the European partners to contribute?
Well, look, it's a matter, obviously, for discussion today. There are a number of different European countries around the table. The Prime Minister will be speaking to other European countries as well. So I'm sure you wouldn't expect me to get into precise figures in terms of each one. But what we are doing today is making clear that Europe does now need to step up. Yes, there does need to be significantly increased defence spending. That's why we have done that action, not words, over the past week. But it is also, Trevor, as I indicated a moment or two ago, speaking now about how we can get that permanent peace in Ukraine, which is vital, not just for the security of Europe.
All right, let's just deal with another element of this. Mr. Zelensky's meeting the King today. Is that a rather subtle sign that we've decided to take sides with him against Mr. Trump, who will no doubt be watching that and will be less than pleased that Zelensky is seeing the King before he is seeing the King?
No, I think it's an indication that the United Kingdom and the Prime Minister is playing a hugely important diplomatic role as an honest broker. We have, over the past 3 years, across governments, actually provided support for Ukraine. Here, I'm speaking to you from my
No, but
own.
I'm asking you about the sheer symbolism of Zelensky meeting the king. He didn't have to. There was no necessity for that meeting. From the White House, it must be seen as a straightforward provocation.
Well, I think it's up to the White House how they see the diplomacy of the moment, and the Prime Minister is in regular contact with President Trump. But I think it is entirely right that there is a recognition given of the role President Zelensky has played in defending the sovereign nation of Ukraine over the past 3 years. So it's entirely appropriate that he sees His Majesty the King.
All right, let's talk about something which is perhaps entirely in your government's control. On Friday, we learned that your colleague, Annalisa Dodds, had resigned in protest at the cuts in international aid, which would fund the rise in defence spending that you spoke of. She said it was a matter of principle for her. Why isn't it a matter of principle for you? Why are you still there?
Well, firstly, just say thank you to Annalisa for the work she did both in government, in opposition. I support the Prime Minister's decision on this 100%. I think that the necessity of the moment requires that we significantly increase our hard power, significantly increase our military spending. I think this is a once-in-a-generation moment. And I joined a government that said that it would put national security first. That is precisely what the Prime Minister is doing. I think this additional defence spending is vital for the security of our country.
So Annalisa Dodds made the wrong call. She's just made a mistake.
I disagree with the judgment that Annalisa has made here in terms of aid and overseas development spending. We will still in 2027 be spending over £9 billion on overseas development. We'll still be amongst the top 10 in the world. We will continue to support people in desperate situations in places like Ukraine that we have been discussing, or indeed in Gaza, or indeed in Sudan. And the Foreign Office will now conduct an exercise with ensuring that the money we are spending is used most effectively.
Well, this is very interesting. You say that we're going to continue to support people in desperate places. Well, let's look at the numbers here. Something like half of the reduced aid budget now will go towards housing asylum seekers, mainly in hotels. That means that there will be less money for protection of women and children in war zones, for provision of clean water, for HIV programs. Actually, we're not going to continue supporting the kinds of people you've just been talking about. And that may be a perfectly right, proper judgment, but don't you need to be honest with everybody that this is a choice that you've made?
Listen, we're perfectly honest about the tough nature of this decision in the circumstances we find ourselves. What I would say, though, Trevor, is that the Foreign Office, as I say, will be looking at how every penny of the aid budget is spent to ensure that we are using it effectively to support vulnerable people, as we have done since the Labour government in the 1960s introduced the concept of a Minister for Overseas Development. So I'm proud of our history.
And the Wilson government that introduced that concept, I think would probably be saying right now, this doesn't seem like the plan for a Labour government, that actually what you've done is essentially, as Lord Dannatt, the former boss of the army, said, you're sacrificing, not only are you going to make people suffer, but you're sacrificing our soft power, and you're not going to be able to fund an equivalent increase in hard power. That actually, in fact, this is a net loss for a gesture.
No, it certainly isn't a gesture. We're not interested in gesture politics. We're interested in action. Yes, certainly.
And that says that what you're losing in soft power, you're not absolutely going to make up in hard power.
Look, I do think this is a transfer from soft to hard power, but it is squarely in the Labour tradition. It was the Labour government of Clem Attlee and Ernie Bevin as the Foreign Secretary that founded NATO. So that framework is still fundamental to European security. It is putting the safety and security of our citizens first. That is exactly what the Prime Minister is doing, and also playing hugely significant role now in collective security for the European continent and being that link to the United States. It's vital work, and that will be continuing at the summit today.
Well, you know what a lot of your Labour colleagues will be saying? Okay, so we have to boost the defence budget. Maybe the aid budget could have contributed, but you've taken it all from the aid budget when, for example, you still haven't done anything to deal with the fact that Labour is giving billions, 10 billion a year extra to pensioners who in this country over the last 10 years have done quite well. You could have, for example, tweaked the so-called triple lock to pay for some of this, but actually you've decided to take the money out of the mouths of the poor of the world, but kept wealthy old people in this country in money.
Well, firstly, as I say, the Foreign Office will look at how every penny is spent to ensure that we do continue to support vulnerable people. That's why we'll still be spending over £9 billion on overseas development in 2027.
Yeah, it used to be 15 billion.
To your point about pensioners, pensioners who have contributed to this country throughout their lives then find them then in retirement don't have the opportunity to top up their income. So I make no apology for standing by the triple lock. We've promised to stand by the triple lock, and we will continue to do so. Okay. But as I say, Trevor, this decision on overseas aid has not been an easy decision. Of course it hasn't, but it is the right one for the security of our country.